Today we have René Lafort, a longtime observer of Ethiopian politics. An acute observer, the hallmark of his writing has been his objectivity. He never goes beyond his observation and his facts, but his analysis is always trenchant, incisive, and prescient. In the last piece on the unrest in the Oromia and Amhara regions of Ethiopia, published in Open Democracy, he has gone from expressing renewal to warning against the brutal repression of the Ethiopian regime, and now explaining that the crisis in Ethiopia has brought the country to the edge of disintegration. He was in Ethiopia for 3 weeks in October. I will ask him about his experience and his observations. So, René, the last piece that you wrote on Open Democracy is entitled Ethiopia's Crisis. A multi-dimensional crisis that you're describing in the piece. It looks like you're pessimistic because in July you expressed this hope for renewal in Ethiopia, that the government, or at least the leaders, were kind of committed to the idea of reform and renewal. And in September, it was the warning shot. And now it's a crisis and a very pessimistic outlook. What made you so pessimistic?
Let me start first of all with the crisis. You know, the very common view is that this crisis is a crisis between an authoritarian regime and a popular unrest. In fact, it's more complicated than that, because the crisis has two phases. One is a crisis inside the regime itself, and the second is a crisis between a very weakened regime, a very weak ruling power, very heterogeneous, and a popular unrest. So you have these two dimensions. I expected reforms during the last 2 years, because I had discussions with some EPRDF top officials, mainly people belonging to what is called the old guard, people who were with the TPLF mainly, or sometimes with the INDM since the beginning. Okay, and it has been very, very clear for me that they wanted reform. Okay. And that their ultimate goal was clearly to implement exactly the constitution. But what appeared during this last month, for me at least, is that this reformist group is not so strong as to impose reforms to the whole EPRDF. And that there is a very, very strong inner struggle inside the EPRDF between what I have called the reformists or the alarmists, those who say the status quo is suicidal, and what I have called the complacents, who said that there is no need and even no urgency for an important, significant change in the whole political system. Okay. These two forces strongly disagreed and compete each other very, very harshly until a consensus was reached at the beginning of October, just after the Bishop II event, and at the end of a long 4 months long inner conferences and meeting of the EPRDF. Okay. This consensus is a weak one, weak in two senses. One, it's weak because it has been very, very hard to reach, and I am not sure that it will hold for a long time. And the second weak because what about the agree is also very, very poor. They agree, in fact, on two things: the state of emergency and what they call reforms. But I think that, again, there is a big misunderstanding regarding the word reform. Foreign observers, intellectuals in Ethiopia, some professionals, so the youngsters, etc., they expect reforms which will deal with the core of the problems of Ethiopia. It means implementing fully the constitution, human rights, balanced federalism, etc., etc. But the consensus reached shows that reforms in the minds of the people who agreed on this consensus has another meaning, okay? The reforms are mainly reforms inside the EPRDF to strengthen the EPRDF so as to make it more able to tackle with the adjustments which are required by the situation. That's the reason why I am relatively pessimistic about the possibility of strong and sincere reforms in the near future.
Do you think that even the reformist, much less the complacent, even the reformists understand the depth and nature of the unrest in Oromia and later in Amhara region and in other places? Because reform must be responding to people's demands. But do you really think after talking to them that they do understand what the nature and depth of the unrest is?
In my view, they have a wrong analysis of the situation, okay? That's my view. Because what they believe is that the problem they face is not a problem of a bad constitution or bad institutions or a wrong political line, but it's simply or mainly a problem of implementation. What fails is the implementation of a political line which is the right one, with a constitution which is the right one, and with institutions which are the right ones. So what lacks is simply implementation, okay? And they believe that the crisis has essentially an economical background and not a political background. So they believe that, or at least they say that they believe, because they are, I repeat, divided among themselves, okay? But the agreement is that to solve this crisis, it's simply or mainly necessary to improve what they call service delivery. If the cake is shared in a fairest way, then the crisis will be solved. The crisis is not, in their view, mainly political. It's a material crisis. A crisis coming from what they call a demanding society. And for them, what the society demands is a bigger part of the cake.
I see. So now you have spoken to high-level officials, party officials, government officials in different regions of Ethiopia. It seems like from your writing that you've spoken to them, but you have also spoken to people in Addis Ababa, in Mekelle, in other places as well.
Yeah.
There is one way that the high-level officials in Addis Ababa understand the nature of the crisis, and there is another understanding at the level of local officials. I'll come to that question shortly, but what do you think are people in all of these areas that you've spoken to demand? What is the nature of their demand, the core problems as you saw it?
We must be precise, okay? I discussed with people who are mainly or essentially intellectuals and professionals, which means that I didn't spoke with peasants, And peasants, as you know, consist of 80% of the Ethiopian population. Okay, that's a very important reservation. Huh? So the people with whom I spoke are in fact very, very pessimistic, because they think that the main tool the government will use to solve the crisis is repression. They believe that the government will not implement true reforms. Then they believe that the country will engage in this vicious circle of more repression, more unrest, more repression, etc. And that at the end of the day, what could happen is a real catastrophe for Ethiopia. They mean by that even the dislocation of the country. That's what they believe. Okay, if they are right or wrong is another story. But that is a position of, I would say, almost all people with whom I spoke, except the officials, of course.
So what do the social scientists actually say? And you actually deal with them, this multidimensional crisis. What are those core sources of crisis at this time, as the professionals actually tell you? It's not that what I mean is that you're saying that they feel like the problems could lead actually to the dislocation or the disintegration of Ethiopia. What are those core problems in the view of your informants that might eventually lead to the dislocation of Ethiopia?
Now, for them, I must say that I have been struck by the level of, I would even use the word ethnic hate. I never observed such a high degree of ethnic hate since I came back in Ethiopia in 2002. Everybody feels his own ethnicity besieged. Everybody feels its own ethnicity marginalized in comparison with the other ethnicity. Everybody believes that an ethnic conflict could occur at any moment. And of course, this ethnic hate focuses on the Tigrayans. And for the first time, I observed among even intellectuals no dissociation between the TPLF and the Tigrayan population. And one of the arguments which were frequently used is that, wrongly or rightly, it's still another question, but one of the main arguments which was used was the Tigrayan population never condemned the brutality of the repression. If this population doesn't condemn this brutality, it means that it approved this. So this point is very, very important. I even discussed with a social scientist who has a very deep knowledge of Ethiopia at its grassroots level. And he told me that he is in this country for more than 20 years. And he told me that for the first time since he is in Ethiopia, he heard a narrative which from the ethnical point of view has some links or something to do with the narrative in Rwanda before the genocide. So that is what afraid all the people I discussed with. Now, except this ethnic dimension, which is fundamental, I will say that one of the main, I think the ethnic dimension is a basic one. Okay, it's a basic one. Then, regarding the other grievances of this group of people, this social group, their grievances focus on, I would say, less purely democratic rights in the sense we understand it, than more room to manage their life as they want. It's the intrusiveness character of the EPRDF which is mainly insupportable for them. Preventing them to do their job as they want, to use their professional capacity due to their obedience to the party, preventing them to develop their business as they can, preventing them preventing them to express fully their professional capacities. That's the main point.
In your piece, you look at the TPLF regime and see the core itself divided. You call them the alarmists and the complacents.
And I would say also the regionalists and the centralists. The divide is multifaceted.
Okay. Is the division, the lack of cohesiveness at the center, the core of the power structure, at least into these camps of alarmists and complacents, is that basically the reason why they cannot really understand the nature of the problem itself? Or is that what you mean, the weakening of central authority? See, one of the major crises that you talk about is the weakening of central authority. Could you say a little bit more about that? Is it this division over reform, or is there something more structural about the weakening of central authority?
Not the weakening of the central authority. You know, it started immediately after Meles' death, because the power system has been built for and around Meles. When Meles disappeared, it was clear that the power system couldn't work for another person who hadn't the authority, the historical authority, and the intellectual capacity of Meles. Okay, so the system becomes so weak and so weak and so weak that the old guard, all the officials who were sidelined or even expelled from the Central Committee or the Executive Committee, etc., they came back in unofficial positions, but they were obliged and willing also to come back to reinforce at least the power and particularly the central power. Now, 2 years ago, when the Tigrayan old guard started to denounce the TPLF, how the TPLF behaves in Tigray, his alarm was not received by the TPLF executive committee. This group of people were obliged to push, to force, in fact, an important part of the TPLF to admit that there was a real crisis starting with Tigray. The same thing happened in AMDM with for example, Bereket Simon. The same thing partly also occurred in the OPDO. So the weakening of the central authority and of the authorities of the different components of the EPRDF comes from this divides around the analysis of the situation, what should be done, generational gap, etc., and a pure power struggle. Everything is mixed, so a very incredibly confused, free-for-all situation. That's the reason why the authority is declining to such a degree.
I want to remain close to that subject again. Understanding it in terms of personalities or politicians is one thing. That is, you even say in the piece, Meles left with the password that the successor, Hailemariam Desalegn, does not have the password, so he has never attained any foothold, real authority. It's only the complacent, or the alarmists that are trying to prop him up and trying to implement reform. So on one level, let's say it's an issue of personalities, and we can discuss that as well. But in your piece, you also talk about a more structural weakening, not just a question of personalities, that the structure of federalism, the constitutional rule, the relationship between the party and the state, and as we just mentioned, that everything is mixed up.
Yeah.
So could you speak to the more structural weakening of the government and party structure, rather than simply the power struggle between personalities?
The problem is that the institutions are not strong enough to play their role. Okay? When you ask who is now in command, nobody can reply. Normally, the reply would be very simple. The executive committee of the EPRDF is in command. In fact, it isn't true, because there are a lot of people who are not in any official position and who play this decisive role in the power structure. So now we have a kind of very informal power real system, very informal, and this leads to this weakening of the authority and this relative inefficiency of the power system, and its difficulties, incredible difficulties to understand and to respond in a united and efficient manner to the crisis.
The informal system is the oligarchy that is created, I think, that you're referring to. And
no,
there is also
not only. The oligarchy complicates the whole picture. But even without an oligarchy, you will have the same problems. Even without, okay? And the oligarchy is the second level of the informality of the ruling system. And these two levels are completely intertwined, which makes the whole picture even more confused.
The promise, and this is also from the promise of the EPRDF dispensation beginning in 1991, is that they understood one of the perennial problems in Ethiopia, which is the national question.
Yeah.
And the federal arrangement and constitutional rule was meant to address this long-standing question in Ethiopia. But you're also saying that the problem of real decentralization is the major problem. That is, the center wants to remain strong, but at the same time betrays the very idea that actually gave them initial legitimacy, that they were trying to understand and address this important issue. Where is it at right now? And how does that relate to the questions in Oromia, for instance, the lack of structural decentralization, not just a question of personalities or power struggle or the complication that the oligarchy creates because of their own economic benefits, but as you view some form of resolution in the future, what do you think that the center is contemplating at this point in time, if the problem is actually not the failing to implement not the delivery of services, but real decentralization? What is the possibility for real decentralization from the view of the center?
You know, to start with this question, you must mention the divergences in the analysis of the situation. For the center, the crisis occurred because the regional powers have failed. And because the regional powers have failed, the center must take the lead so as to re-establish the situation. For the regional powers on the opposite, the crisis comes from the fact that the center has been too powerful, has maintained the regional powers under under its tutelage, and that the regional powers, they didn't have the free hand to really rule their regions. So since the departure, the analysis is completely different. Okay, in fact, the center says to solve the crisis we need more centralization. The peripheries say to solve the crisis we need more decentralization. Okay, and the debate between the two is still going on. And what happened in the beginning of October with this package of state of emergency and reforms is a compromise. On one side, the state of emergency gives a first hand to the center in terms of maintaining law and order. Okay. On the other side, practically, you have seen that OPDO and INDM and TPLF Mekele have gained a stronger autonomy than the autonomy they had before. For example, the change in the leadership of the OPDO, Wakene and Lema instead of Wakene and Lema instead of, what was the name of the two, the lady, the name of the two foreigners?
Aster Mamo and Mukhtar Kadir.
Yeah, Aster Mamo and Mukhtar. This change is highly significant. Highly significant. You can discuss who are these two guys, what they want really to do, what is really their program. But at least they were elected after an inner conflict, which focused on the necessity inside the OPDO to gain more autonomy vis-à-vis the center. So this question, I repeat, is still not resolved. And the balance of power between center and regions is still fluctuating. And what will happen at the end, I don't know. I don't know, okay? Because what is interesting is that these centrifugal forces are very, very strong, not only in the Amara region and in Oromia, but also in Tigray. Also in Tigray. And you can observe it in Tigray. I wouldn't say conflict, but at least tensions between the TPLF Mekele and the TPLF Addis Ababa. So the TPLF high official in position in Addis Ababa and the TPLF high official in position in Mekele. So I repeat, the centrifugal force are very, very strong. The center remain very, very strong too, and the balance of power between the two is still in discussion.
All right. So even the packages that you talked about are a compromise, not really a real imposition of authority, but a compromise between the centrifugal forces in the regions, which you described very well, and the center that is committed to minor reforms, not major or deep reform, but minor reforms at the center, like changing personnel and changing party leaders.
I don't see the situation in the same way, okay? For me, the regional powers, including INDM and OPDO, they have at least instrumentalized for their profit the rising ethno-nationalism in these two areas, and the same thing in Tigray. In the center, the strongest push for reforms is based in the center, and not in the different regions. And you can observe that in the Amara region or in Oromia, the higher authorities and the security forces play the leading role in the repression. So you must not confuse the centrifugal forces which struggle for more autonomy with a struggle for more regional democracy. That's two different levels, two different things. Those who have a very long view for what they call the full respect of the Constitution are mainly in the center. Except, which makes once more the things more complicated, that in the regions, the regional powers, they were in a favor of a strict application of the Constitution regarding the federal system. But regarding the human rights, individual human rights, it's another story.
But I thought you said that officials at the center, or even the social scientists that you spoke to, that what they see is a problem of delivery of services were inefficient. So reform meant efficiency of delivery of services. The center also still sees that the institutions are perfect, the political line is perfect, the economic policies are perfect, even scientific, as you say. What is needed, as you just said, is, or wrote in your pieces, that simply efficient delivery of services. But what at the same time I hear you say is that there are real centrifugal forces that are contesting the authority of the center. So I don't see any reform, any real reform that will deal with the structural problem of the demands of the regional authorities or the demands of people in the region, in Oromia or in Amhara or even in Tigray, as you say, in Tigray, that they think that they were betrayed by the center. So all I see right now is a struggle between centrifugal forces and a center that is trying to hold together. Isn't that the case? If that tension still exists?
Right. At this stage, you are right when you say that no reforms were undertaken, either in terms of true federalism or in terms of individual human rights. That's true. Okay. Does it mean that these reforms will never happen? That's another story. Because from what I heard, what at least an important part of the leaders have in mind is that the real reforms could start only when law and order will be fully reestablished. Okay? Which means at best in a couple of months, when the state of emergency will be suppressed. Okay, so we need a couple of months to know if something will be done in terms of federalism or in terms of individual human rights. Now, second part of your question. What I heard during my last stay has been different from what I heard during the former stays in the center, because everybody now sticks to the consensus which has been reached. Okay? And despite the fact that most of the reformists are in Addis Ababa, these reformists, they stick to the consensus which is presented in this famous package. But what they really believe, in my view, is different. At least a little bit different. They think they should move a little bit, okay? But an important part of the EPRDF thinks that there is no move necessary except this federal question, this sharing of power and resources between the center and the peripheries. And the conflict for the sharing of resources is between, I would say, politicians who are at the same time oligarchs.
Okay. The reformists that you actually named them, the old brain of the TPLF, the army commander, and the security head are supposed to be the reformists who are actually pushing for more deep reform in the country. The people that are actually semi-opposed to reform are the complacent who think that everything is hunky-dory, that they say it's just a few foreign agents or some discontented youth that are. So they don't even recognize that there is any need for reform.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. But
they want that the EPRDF remains a bunker.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, what that simply means is that the EPRDF will remain the ruler in the country for the foreseeable future. There is no other deep reform in the sense of contemplating a change of government or leaving power.
That's the reason why I would say the full process now is on the results edge. Because on one side, you have an EPRDF which is potentially ready to make some reforms step by step in the long run. Okay? As you said, they believe that the only one who can implement, manage, and control the reform process is the EPRDF. On the other side, you have the popular demand, or the demand of some social groups, demands which are very strongly expressed, okay? And you have also at least the legal opposition. The legal opposition asks for immediately institute a transitional government, maybe, okay, which is, in my view, completely unrealistic. Okay. So I think that the only possibility to have a peaceful process to solve this crisis is, on one side, an EPRDF which will be sincerely decided to reform, and the other side, an opposition which will understand that at this stage, for near future at least, the EPRDF must remain the master of the agenda and of the timetable, and that they must be patient and accept only to progress step by step. And to get these two conditions today, it's an incredible hunting task.
So the best case scenario for the possibilities of change, you're saying, is the reformists within the EPRDF that after the state of emergency had restored order, they would probably start reforming.
Possibly. Probably, I don't know. Possibly.
Oh, that's the best case scenario.
Yeah.
That's the best case scenario. And when they do implement reform, they're not really contemplating that there will be regime change. They're not looking at that at all. Even in the best case scenario, the change of the system, the change of government is not in the thinking of even the reformists. On the other hand, people today, and you're saying this, that in the eyes of the people, the government is completely discredited. In the eyes of the people that you spoke to, that the government is completely discredited, has lost all legitimacy in the eyes of the people, that it cannot be trusted to be an agent of change whatsoever. So that kind of disconnect between what the potential reformist would think is appropriate as a path forward and what the people actually expect is a chasm that cannot be bridged.
That's the hardest point. That's the hardest point. You know, I give you now my belief and my view, okay, which I repeat, I can be completely wrong, okay. But my belief is that at this stage and for a near future, there is no alternative to EPRDF's power, because the opposition is not strong enough, united enough to be a real alternative force which could, in the near future, replace the EPRDF. It means that everybody must accept that the process of change will be a long-term progressive process. Okay. At the end, you know, what is the view of the EPLF's officials who have a political mind? Okay, their view is that through development, the society, the Ethiopian society will change. Classes will appear. And classes will appear, political parties linked to the different classes will appear. And then a real pluralism will emerge by itself. That's their view, okay? Bon. Then, in this view, they are ready to lose the power, but only in the long term. Only in the long term. Will the Ethiopian people accept, or at least some parts of the Ethiopian people accept, to wait for such a long time? And will the protesters and the opposition parties accept this very slow step-by-step approach? That's the main question. That's the main question.
Yeah, that's understandable. Let's even accept your premise that the there is no alternative to the EPRDF at this point in time because the opposition is not ready, it's not cohesive, it's not prepared, it's not even a real opposition. Let's accept that premise as it is. And what you're contemplating is in the near future, there is really no possibility that the EPRDF would leave power. What they're contemplating is actually what Prime Minister Meles envisioned. That is, Ethiopia would move from this pre-capitalist stage to a middle income country. And at that point in time, the middle class itself would be ready to take over power because a strong middle class would be able to create parties that are able to rule. So that is probably in 2025, at least at the most.
At best.
This is contemplating peaceful change. That gradual change would lead to peaceful change, and that's only when the EPRDF is ready to give up power. This is actually a thinking of the scientific dialectics of Marxism, that Marxist dialectics that they had always believed in, that it's only when the class structure had changed that power would be transferred.
You are 100% right. You cannot understand what is happening now if you don't go to the history and the students' movement of the 70s. That's exactly the same thing.
All right, that's good to agree. But in your piece, you say some important things like the question of power being concentrated in the hands at the center is a real problem that goes back to the 19th century.
Yeah.
Power had been shifting from the north to the center. And you say today the center is Oromia.
Yeah.
Now, you write in there that despite their internal divisions, this claim unites vast majority of Oromo, justified by their numbers and their major contribution to the economy. Yeah. It is generally agreed a genuine application of the Constitution would be sufficient for this claim to be satisfied. Now, this is looking into the evolution of the Ethiopian state, taking into account that power had always remained Abyssinian, as you say.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, with the rise of sustained opposition in this, what is actually geographically and historically the center in Oromia, the question in Oromia is a question of state power, that they really want to be a part of governing, at least governing themselves in the region, in the Oromia region, and have some say at the center. So what is being envisioned is a weaker center and a strong periphery. What do you think the other power claimants would think about that?
No, it's not exactly what you said. What could be expected is a weakened center, stronger peripheries, But also a main point you miss is that in the center, a fair representation of all peripheries, which, rightly or wrongly, OPDO, AMDM don't believe that this exists now. So you could imagine a kind of confederation with very strong regional powers and a center which will be weak compared to today, but in the center, a fair representation of the Oromo, OPDO, or an Oromo party, an Amara party, a Nigerian party, etc., etc. That could be one possible outcome for the federal crisis. It's not, a weak center, and the shift will not be simply from a weak center to strong periphery, but also from what is perceived as an ethnically based center to an ethnically balanced center. The two wolves must go together.
Actually, the opposition, at least in the OFC, the Oromo Federalist Congress, and before that, Marara, had this formula. He'd been saying that what we need is self-rule in the regions and shared rule in the center.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, so the formula is that the center should not be as strong as it has always been in history. Power should be really decentralized within the federal structure. Yeah. But what I was going to ask you about is that you mentioned in relation to this kind of formula, you mentioned the Amhara elite, the Abyssinian elite.
Yeah.
What would be the reaction there? That is, their mantra has always been Ethiopia, just as it is, a unitary Ethiopia. But there is a strong feeling in the Amhara region itself that in your writing that I understand, that I read, is that there is a strong feeling of regional identity and being able to self-rule in the region and be shared rule in the center, in the Amhara region itself. Could you see any possibility that the old Abyssinian power, who don't like the regional identities ever, what would be their role? Or were they simply the disgruntled Abyssinian elite who always envisioned a multinational center, or would they accept the federal structure now?
So I can only say what I have observed. Okay, for the first time, I heard Tigrayans with whom I spoke, saying that we have no objection at all to an Oromo prime minister. For us, it's not a problem. Okay, the Oromo are the majority of the people here. Their economy is very strong. They have the right to ask for the post of prime minister. Okay, that's the first time I heard that. Okay, now during my discussions with the Amaras, until my last day, I was surprised by their evolution, because before that they confused Ethiopianness with Amaraness. Now they have dissociated the two. Some of them, at least, have dissociated the two. And they ask for a self-rule of the Amara, no more, no less. A self-rule which will correspond to the population of the Amara state and its resources. Okay, but now Volcaid has happened, and this Volcaid story has wake up a very, very reactionary nationalist, Ethiopian nationalist feeling. Okay, I disagree with those who say that the Amara elite hasn't changed. and that it still want to reestablish a unitary state under the Amhara domination, at least the Amhara, the cultural domination. Because I have personally observed a very, very strong evolution inside this Amhara elite. But I have also observed during my last stay a stop in this evolution and incredible sensibility to this Wolkite story as a focus of the old Amhara nationalism, I would say.
All right, it's a different thing in the piece that you wrote about their ostracism and the assertion of Amharaness and a return to Ethiopianness, but that's a different issue, because what you're saying is in the region, Geddu Andargacho is actually popular, that he is actually seen as a defender of what is rightly deserved by the region.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is that you see in Tigray a weakened central government, that there is a view even in Tigray that they have no opposition to an Oromo prime minister because they believe that the Oromo have the right to claim it for historical reasons, for demographic reasons, and for economic reasons. So there is basically a consensus emerging within the Ethiopian body politic at the lower level, at the regional level, that the center should be kind of weakened but shared and balanced with representation from the regions.
Exactly. I agree. I fully agree with you on this point. I fully agree with you on this.
Okay. I mean, it's in your writing. That's what I'm reading, which is new to me, that this idea of an Ethiopianness, a whole assimilated Ethiopianness, has unraveled within the country itself. That the Amhara have accepted their region, the Tigrayans have accepted their region. The Oromo have already asserted that, and there is a sort of a consensus saying that the region should be empowered, power should evolve, and the center should be weakened, but whatever power that remains in the center should be shared.
Exactly.
All right. If that's the case, that this kind of consensus emerging within the country itself, what are the possibilities this could be done? Now, what you're describing as far as the power structure is concerned is that the core, the TPLF itself, is divided.
Yeah.
And the coalition partners like the ANDM, OPDO, and others are actually pulling away from the center, that they're trying to...
No. It's more complicated than that, Ezekiel. Because in ANDM and in OPDO, you have people who have high position in Addis Ababa and who are also centralists. The divide between centralist and regionalist is not only between TPLF and the others. It's inside TPLF, inside ANDM, inside OPDO.
In your piece, the way you write about that is that if the whole thing collapses, the whole edifice, the whole power structure collapses, even members of the OPDO or the ANDM in the center would lose power and their economic interests. So what holds them together is not a vision of a genuine decentralization or democratization or constitutional rule, but self-interest. Now, what I was going to say is that, what I was going to ask you is that...
Yeah, please.
What I was going to ask you is that that's the view. It's common interest that holds them together as elites, the political and economic elite. But the party structure that had helped EPRDF to continue to rule for the last 25 years is actually fragmenting. It's not really as cohesive as it once was. That it seems like the party itself has run its course. The idea that the TPLF created surrogate parties would remain with them is just only at the elite level. Maybe the rank and file of OPDO or ANDM are not subscribing to this notion because they are not beneficiaries of power and economics.
They are benefiting at their level. A cabinet chairman is benefiting too. A cabinet chairman is a local oligarch. Okay, so oligarchy, it goes from the cabinet level until the top level of the government. Okay, so at this stage, if I must summarize how I understand the question, no, the EPRDF has no clear vision where to go, because it is clearly divided. It doesn't know clearly where to go. He thinks it needs time to elaborate where to go. In the next 6 months, one of the main tasks of the EPRDF will be to write a document about what the EPRDF should be in the 10 coming years. Okay, so they are in a very, very, very precarious situation. Okay, but on the same time, they know that if they stop to work together, they will sink together. So they will remain united as long as they will share this belief.
Okay, that's good. Now that brings me to kind of one of my last questions, that in order to implement the reforms, the very cosmetic reforms that they envision itself, they need to restore order. And one of the ways of restoring order, law and order, is the state of emergency.
Yeah.
What is the state of emergency doing? How much committed are the power structure is to the state of emergency? What are the chances that the state of emergency would actually restore order? You actually say that it's a show of strength.
I believe that's my view again. I can also again be completely wrong, but I believe that the law and order will reestablish some kind of law and order. Perhaps some pockets of disturbances will remain here and there. Okay, because I don't believe that in the present situation, the possibility of a structured guerrilla headed by the spearhead of the unrest until now, the young people, or a kind of classical age-old farmers armored upsurge, I don't think that both could occur at this stage. That's my opinion after discussions I had with people who know better than me I would say the military history and the history of the popular armored upsurges in Ethiopia.
Well, I mean, historically speaking, at least even the last 2 changes of government, it's not a peasant upsurge that brought down the government. So it's not even a question to see. But here is the thing that I see, that you actually, speaking to some Central Committee member, they say that show me a developing country where in the world, which has a political strategy and guidelines as well as articulate as in Ethiopia, which means they have this self-assured belief that they are right, their economic policies are right, their institution is right. The only source of success or change in Ethiopia is the EPRDF, because they believe that they have performed miracles in Ethiopian history. There is nothing wrong that they had done. It's a matter of adjustments, that making adjustments there.
Yeah, that's the official credo now.
Okay.
I believe personally that there are some people inside the EPRDF, including at its top, who don't believe that. But they stick to the consensus.
Okay, so we don't know whether they. You said that they're visionless. They don't know what to do. They're just groping their way into trying to resolve.
As a group, they don't know where to go.
At the beginning of your piece, you say something about Mullis left with the password.
Yeah.
And then you describe that the problems, the deep problems, the personality problem, the party problems, the different levels of crisis within the Ethiopian body politic.
Yeah.
And then you what you're saying is basically the best hope for reform in Ethiopia is the old guard, which is now the strongest supporter of the Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, in that they would...
One second. The old guard in alliance with a new generation of young intellectuals and professionals.
Outside the party?
Inside the party too.
Okay. So the best hope...
Yeah. The strongest critics of OPDO leadership, INDM leadership, TPLF leadership are these middle-level party members.
Okay. So within the party that they're trying to support Hailemariam Desalegn to implement the deep reforms that he had kept promising and expressing a strong commitment of the leadership to implementing deep reforms. But the reforms that you end up saying that they really end up focusing on service delivery. That's exactly what the deep reform is.
Exactly.
From reading the piece itself, and this is a very interesting and deeply analytical piece, what I concluded is that the power structure is not cohesive. What is really holding the center together today is the military and security apparatus, and these are the ones that are pushing for reform. But the entire party structure are held together only in averting catastrophic collapse, a catastrophic collapse of the center, which might be destructive to their own interests. That's what's holding them together. Would you think that this fragmented party with different interests, only held together not by an ideology or a vision for a country, but simply to maintain a commitment to their own power and their own economic benefit? What do you think that this would be able to do for Ethiopia? What will be the future for Ethiopia? What do you think is the way forward?
First of all, you mentioned deep reforms, okay? And I started the interview by saying you that there is a complete misunderstanding about the word reforms, okay? They want they plan deep reforms, but only very progressively and in the long term. It's by a step-by-step process. The reforms announced by Hailemariam Desalegn are very poor. An electoral reform, okay, and consultation with the people to discuss here and there, etc., etc., etc. Okay. When during the discussions I had, I asked for the possible emergence of counterpowers, autonomous counterpowers, okay, which could play a check and balance role. Okay. This idea is not at this stage in the picture. Later, yes, but at this stage, no. So, reforms, I repeat, we must be very, very careful by using this word now. Okay. Now, the future of the country, they still believe that their legitimacy and their main aim, if they have a vision, a common vision, even if they are divided on how to reach it, to implement it, their vision is the development, economic growth. They share this issue. That's a common factor among all of them. Okay. Of course, also for their own interest, because if there is growth, there is more economical possibilities and also more possibility for themselves. But now they continue to believe that the aim of the ruling power is economic growth, development. And contrary to what is usually said, they have been successful in this regard. They have done a lot. There's no doubt about that, okay? They wish to continue, but the problem is that most of them doesn't realize that with this power system they have now, it will be very difficult to sustain growth. Because the economy has reached the stage where it must be inclusive. It must include the capacities of all, and it must include the investments of all. Okay. So this point is in debate. It is in debate, but it is not fully realized. Okay. But I think that what could perhaps save the unity of this leadership in the near and middle future is this aim to develop the country, to sustain, to maintain high growth.
High-level growth in a country that had a history of conflict, and now that had erupted into violence altogether, maintaining 10% economic growth and banking on that as this political stabilizer is a paradox, is a very deeply disturbing paradox. But you conclude your essay by saying that is the paradox of a strong man.
Yeah.
So
that is really astonishing. That's really astonishing. I don't know if this feeling of this view is shared also in Oromia, by the Oromia people. Okay, but I can assure you that from the poorest peasant in Habesha until the high and even probably the highest officials, the expectation for a strong man who will save the party, the country, and who will be strong enough to impose reforms and to control the process, that the reform process will not lead to chaos, this expectation is still incredibly high. Incredibly high.
Yeah, it's very interesting that I started this interview by asking you why you're so pessimistic. And now I understand that the expectation is that Meles, the strong man that constructed the edifice of state and party structure in Ethiopia, left with the password. That his successor doesn't have a password. So the hope is that there will be another strong man unseen on the horizon. So Ethiopia is in for a protracted period of uncertainty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, to make a long story short, since the fall of the imperial system, the Ethiopian regime have been unable to build a political system widely acceptable and sustainable. And that is still into question.
Yep, the question remains about power. And you conclude by saying the solution is from the periphery. Let's see whether the center actually accepts this reality that the periphery needs to have power, both economic and political. Thank you for your answers. Thank you for writing all the time.
Ezekiel, that is not my conclusion. That is the conclusion of the people with whom I spoke.
Okay.
I share this conclusion, but it's not my view.
It's your analysis based on the interviews that you've made.
Exactly.
It's a period of uncertainty.
Total uncertainty.
Even the government is not quite sure of where to go, because as you just said, if stability, political stability, is contingent upon economic growth, that is widely shared. We're very long way from any possibility that would be realized. The present moment is a moment where, in the views of even the government, that there is a demanding population everywhere. They actually say they created a demanding population. They're not ready to answer the demands of the people at this point in time. They think that they have a long period of time to implement reform gradually.
And long journey to make before reaching a point where, in their view, they will not reform by the society will, by its evolution, create these reforms.
Yep, they call it the elitocracy. There's way too much in the piece but I think the conclusion is clear. The government, in the best case of scenario, is prepared to make some reforms, gradual reforms, that is leading to economic success that will translate to political stability.
Yeah.
What we see in Ethiopia itself is a very troubled population all over Ethiopia that are demanding change today. That change is the government must go. That's what we hear from the people. So there is that disconnect between what the government believes is necessary and what the people are demanding. That's where I say that a long period of complete uncertainty, the direction of the country is probably not known and will not be known very soon. So we'll see.
I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. But another question which we don't have enough time to discuss now is always everybody mentions the people's aspiration. I would like to know precisely, social group by social group, which are really their fundamental aspirations. Because I am not 100% sure that the whole population of all social groups are sharing the same grievances and the same aspirations.
At least
that's
in
another issue.
At least in your piece, you have said they want freedom, they want justice, they want participation in their government. At least those ones are the fundamental ideas shared by people all over that
of the demonstrators.
Well, all right. So let's end with this thing that the state of emergency is what's right there. Washington Post, your quote says the state of emergency will bottle up the pressure even more, increasing the likelihood they will explode anew. It won't work.
That's what the Washington Post said.
Right. Let's end with that. Thank you so much.
I disagree with that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
It will partially work. Okay, thank you, Ezekeil. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it deeply. Not only this piece, but the many, many pieces that you have written to try to shed light on developments in Ethiopia. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you and bye-bye.